Okay, I'm Krista, I'm an addict.
I'm Gracie and I'm not.
Hey, I'm
Okay,
Alex, and I'm a person in long-term recovery.
hey Alex, we're so grateful that you were able to join us today. If you want to just start by introducing yourself a little bit and a little bit about your backstory, we'd love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for having me. So my name's Alex Elswick. Um, I've been in recovery for almost 11 years. It'll be 11 years in September, from opioid use disorder. And I kind of have that really dime a dozen kind of story that like everybody seems to have from my generation in terms of I had a surgery, I got exposed to an opioid, I got addicted. Addiction took me all the bad places that people go. And we were chatting before we got on here. We've been in and out of treatment centers. I also have been to many of the blessed all of their doorsteps of the treatment
Yeah.
centers, in Kentucky. So yeah, I know that experience pretty well.
Okay, so what, from like a person in recovery standpoint, like what was the pivotal moment that, like the aha moment? Do you have one of those that like where things seem to like go in a positive pathway?
Yeah, I have a couple probably. I think one of the biggest ones, one of the first people I ever told about my addiction was a counselor at Center College, where I was going to college. And I was trying to go to class and I couldn't sit still and I was in withdrawals and it was just miserable and I couldn't focus. And I took a pretty big risk by telling her that I had a problem because I didn't know how she would react. And she just she was the first person. She's one of the few people in my life who ever reacted in such a way that she made it seem like she cared more about me than she did my drug use. Like, even though I wasn't abstinent at the time, and even though that was probably her goal for me, she cared about me right there as I was, even as I was struggling and I was suffering. And that's not an experience that I've had a whole lot in the counseling and treatment space. We like to force abstinence on people quickly. And I think she just recognized that I was in the middle of a process. And that was a big one for me, just to realize that there were going to be people like that who supported me. And then, certainly the consequences had something to do with helping to see just this is beyond my control. I'm obviously not managing this at all.
Did you face like legal consequences throughout that journey?
I did, unfortunately, quite a few. I got kicked off my college baseball team, got kicked out of college. I got arrested on my college campus for selling drugs, trafficking, by weight, trafficking within 1,000 yards of a school, all that kind of stuff. I'm a person who is really just from birth. I've been pretty privileged. Like, my dad's a doctor, my mom's an accountant. I kind of grew up in the suburbs, and I just say that because they were able, they hired an attorney that I would have been stuck with a public defender otherwise, and I would have gotten probably not bailed out, and the whole experience would have been pretty different. And so I really just say that to say, yes, I have experience with the criminal legal system, but also I'm one of those privileged people who was able to avoid some consequences in some respects. You know what I mean? Not because I'm better than anybody else, but just because I was lucky in that way.
Yeah, I have very similar experiences. Gracie, when you said scholarship, lost a scholarship, arrested in college, that's exactly what I mean. That happened to me as well. So,
And that's why I
what
say my story's kind of I mean, obviously we all have truly individual journeys and we're all individual people, but also there is something, especially for our generation, about just this typical pathway. And you know what I mean? It just seems like we all kind of have a similar story.
for sure, for sure. So, Gracie, did you have a couple questions for him?
Yeah, so you're a professor, right?
Yes.
So what are you teaching?
Yeah, so I have a really cool job. I am a professor, but I'm also an extension specialist at University of Kentucky. So I do the normal things that professors do. I teach in the classroom. I teach in our honors college about drug addiction, drug policy, how addiction impacts families, recovery and harm reduction, all these kinds of things. I do research, and most of the research I conduct and publish is on long-term recovery and recovery capital. But then, and that's what normal professors do. But then in addition to that, I have a cool part of my job that's basically like, the fancy word is research translation. It sounds scary, but it basically just means I take all this great information that we get on campuses and I bring it to people like you all, people who like work in the field, people who can actually use it and put it into good effect. And so actually a podcast is a really cool way to get to do that. So I'm fortunate to be here.
Sure.
So how do you go about teaching students, younger generations who haven't experienced any substance abuse, have never been around it, to actually understand it and take it on with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a kind of an interesting time to be asking because it's August 19th. So I'm just about to start the semester. So I'm finalizing my syllabus, which probably should have been done a month ago. And, my experience is one of the very first things we have students do at the very beginning of the year is define addiction and recovery. And we kind of do it as a class. They come up with their own definition, and then we do it again at the end of the year. And it's really a dramatic change to see their shift in thinking about what really matters in terms of addiction and recovery. And so there's a lot of different strategies. I'll tell you, it's really disappointing as a scientist that science alone is not enough to change everyone's minds. It feels like you should be able to just show people the facts and say, look, here's what all the best scientists in the world have told us. That's all you need to know. And that's not enough for some folks. And what I found is a lot more helpful sometimes is stories, is, kind of what you all are doing here. I mean, trying to elicit the power of stories. So I bring in as many guest speakers as I can in my classes from all my experiences, people in different kinds of recovery, people who have different backgrounds, people who have experienced homelessness, people who've done sex work, people who have been incarcerated, all the things. And I think they learn lots of different great lessons from each person, but the unifying theme is it's humanizing because they like all these people. And so it's like, wow, these people have done things that they're not proud of and that we don't condone, but they're all likable people and they're all doing good things now. And I think that speaks to the power of like recovery, maybe more than any stat I can give.
Yeah, that's great.
Gracie came home after a college course and was like mind blown at she's called me several times, like, she calls me Kay, but she's like, Kay, the other students in the class like have no idea. Like they just don't. Gracie unfortunately had to see, my addiction firsthand, but she said, how can I help them? How can I help them understand? That was like one of her biggest things is like, just they didn't know anything about addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you don't grow up around it, you don't know how to talk to people. It's the stigma. That's really what it comes down to, is the stigma of addiction.
Well, you know how in the treatment and recovery, and especially the harm reduction world, we talk about meeting people where they are. And like,
Sure.
you got to meet people where they are. You can't expect them to change when you want them to change or whatever. We always say that about people who are using drugs, but I think the same thing is true about family members, that you can't just demand that families or the general public or anybody just get it. Like I think in some ways we're fortunate or unfortunate to have experienced it, so we know things that they don't, but it's kind of unfair to go around demanding that everybody just be,
Sure.
use perfect language and totally understand the issue. And so that attitude helps me when I'm going and educating people, just recognizing that they especially if they don't have much experience, or even if they do, sometimes people who have family members, because of a really bad experience, leaving a bad taste in their mouth, it leads them to this really stigmatized negative view about people who use drugs. And that's not, it's hard because we have to respect that experience too. So it's challenging.
So for those people that have had that bad taste in their mouth or bad experience, what kind of advice would you give them to just be open-minded or just be able to be at peace with their family members? Because we have some people following us that that's kind of where they're at. So
Absolutely. Yeah. The biggest thing to remember, like in 12-step programs, we like to say that it's cunning, baffling, and powerful. And it is a helpful reminder to zoom out and just remember that there's just something hard to understand about why somebody would continue to do something that's causing them harm. And so, you know, without getting into the moralizing or any of that kind of stuff, it's a head scratcher to begin with, because why would you continue to do that? And so that's where leaning into the science helps. I think when, you know, my family as a personal experience talked about how much understanding the brain science of addiction helped change their feeling, their attitude towards me. Because instead of it feeling like I was doing these things to them, they understood that something was happening to me, and that I really needed help, and that I didn't need punishment or shame or for someone to yell at me. And I was so fortunate in that way. Like, my grandfather was on his deathbed at the time, and my grandmother was reading him books about how families support loved ones who are addicted. So that's that's incredibly fortunate, you know.
Sure. So we read a little bit about like what you're involved in, Voices of Hope. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, I love it. A shameless plug for Voices.
Yeah.
So we're a recovery community organization, which sounds like just a bunch of people who do recovery stuff, but those words actually mean something specific. So a recovery community organization, or an RCO, is a specific kind of organization. We're completely peer run. So we don't have social workers or clinicians or anybody with big fancy degrees. Our credentialed, the credentials of all of our staff are their lived experience. Like, they've been in the shit, they know what it's like. They've found a kind of recovery that works for them. And so we have about 100 staff, all in recovery, mostly recovery coaches. And so what they do is connect people with resources that they need. A couple of things that make us really very different: we're a community center, not a treatment center. So people don't come and reside with us. You know, if one of the things that I learned through my own addiction experience is that this disease that I have, this disorder, is a chronic disorder. It's this long-term problem, you know? And I kept thinking, oh, if I can just get sober for a week and get the drugs out of my system, then it'll be done. And it's such a short-sighted view. And so the problem was, I would go to treatment over and over again, and I would go for 30 days and get sober and get out and relapse. And I would go for 30 days and get sober and get out and relapse. And I'll be damned if I wasn't trying my hardest, because I was. And it turns out it's because these changes that happen in your brain last a whole lot longer than 30 days. So I was leaving treatment with a brain that was still very addicted, but I'm out here in the community. So what makes a community center different is people come and hang out with us every day if they want to. They can come for the rest of their lives. And this is a place where they find lifelong community in recovery. So we connect people with resources, all the things that you can think are important, like healthcare, like treatment, like housing and transportation. But we also do lots of other things, like sober social events. So sober tailgates for UK football games, and Super Bowl parties, and 4th of July cookouts, and, you know, a safe space for people in recovery to not kind of be threatened by alcohol and that sort of thing all the time. And then the last thing I would mention, there are a lot of things, and I could go on and on for so long, and I won't, but the last thing that makes us very different is we really support all pathways of recovery. We're kind of the believers, like, I don't get to be the king or the arbiter of good or bad recovery. And I don't sit at the top of the hill and say, you're good for how you got here and you're bad for how you got here. I just want people to get there, and I want people to be happy and healthy and safe. And so we host meetings that support all the different pathways. So all of the 12-step programs that you're probably familiar with, AA, NA, CMA, all of those, we definitely support abstinence as a pathway. But we also support people who use medication as a pathway of recovery, people who use harm reduction as a pathway of recovery, people who use faith-based approach. You know, it's just kind of, we like to think of it as non-denominational. Like, you're just all welcome here. And in some ways that makes us a little bit different.
That's awesome. So like, is that just for people that you're in Lexington, right?
Yeah, we're in Lexington. Our main center is on at 644 North Broadway. I don't know if you're familiar with Lexington, but it's right next to Indy's Chicken, which is like a kind of a local landmark in Lexington. Yeah. We primarily serve Central Kentucky. We're through a couple of grants, we expanded to some other counties and started doing work in some rural communities. And we're not exactly decided on what that's going to look like moving forward.
Okay. Okay, that's awesome. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. you shared a lot of knowledge and personal experience, and we're so grateful that we were able to share your story a little bit.
Thank you all so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Have a good day.